Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. I still remember my school days when we were required to memorize the periodic table. Yes, the entire periodic table. Our teachers even gave us poems and jingles so that we could recite the names of elements like a song. And yes, I did memorize them at least until the exam. But here's the real question. What was the actual purpose of all that memorization? Did it help us anywhere in life? Apart from just scoring marks on marksheet? I think no. Today when I look back, I keep asking myself, do we still need to memorize the periodic table? Are we only doing it to get marks and remarks from the teachers? Or is there a hidden use for all this in the future, especially in the field of research and technology? And another thought, if back then we were taught the concepts and logics behind these elements, would we have looked at science differently today? These are some of the questions which keeps popping in my mind. But this time things will be different. Now, we are not going to memorize the periodic table just for marks. We are going to learn it in a way that's practical, logical, and connected to real life. A way that makes sense. Before we dive into semiconductors, let's first explore the periodic table, especially the elements that keep popping up in semiconductor discussions. Because when it comes to semiconductors, we always hear about silicon, germanium, boron, phosphorus, arsenic, and gallium. But wait a second. Why do we hear about only these elements? Why not sodium, calcium, or iron? What's so special about this small group? And out of this, boron, silicon, germanium, and arsenic are called metalloids. Phosphorus is a reactive nonmetal, and gallium is a post transition metal. But what do these fancy names really mean? That is the question. When we look at the periodic table, it feels like a giant family chart. Each family has a label: alkali metals, alkaline earth metals, transition metals, post transition metals, metalloids, active nonmetals. But hold on for a second. Why are they called so? For example, what exactly is the meaning of alkali metals? Why do we say alkaline earth metals? And here's a funny one, transition metals. Are they actually going through some kind of transition? Or is there any another reason behind the name? And what does the word metalloid even mean? Is it half metal and half semi metal or something in between? And then there are the mysterious blocks at the bottom, the lanthanides and actinides. Why are they kept separate from the main table? What does the word lanthanide and actinide even mean? And did you know there are some elements in the periodic table whose properties are still unknown? Yes, what makes them so difficult to study? Why are their properties still unknown? That is the question. Definitely there must be some interesting reason behind that also. And here's where it gets even more exciting. Out of all 118 elements, only a handful become the heroes of semiconductor revolution, and they are silicon, germanium, boron, phosphorus, arsenic, and gallium. Why did only these elements get selected? Why not the others? Is there some hidden property that makes them so suitable? Or is it just because of convenience? So the next time you see the periodic table, don't look at it as just a list of names to memorize. Look at it as a treasure map, full of mysteries, unanswered questions, and clues that connect directly to our modern world. Now let's understand from where the words that are used to describe the categories of the elements in the periodic tables are derived from. Did you know the soap that we use today has its roots in a word that came from ashes? Yes, plant ashes. The words alkali and alkaline that you hear in chemistry textbooks are actually centuries old, and the story takes us from desert plants to the modern periodic table. Thousands of years ago, people noticed something strange. When they burned plants like seaweed or salt tolerant shrubs, the ashes mixed with water, forming a slippery liquid. This liquid could clean clothes, soften water, and even neutralize sour substances. Arabic scholars called this magical ash alkali. It's a Arabic word which simply meant plant ashes. From this, the word alkali was born. In the Middle Ages, the knowledge of alkali traveled to Europe. Later on, chemists experimented with these substances. They found alkalis could neutralize acids, taste bitter, and even turn red plant dye into blue. Fast forward to 1600s and 1700s. Chemists started noticing a pattern. that whenever metals like sodium or potassium combined with water, they created powerful caustic substances like sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide, which was similar in nature as that of slippery liquid which was formed when ashes of the plants like seaweed or salt tolerant shrubs mixed with water. Since the substances formed when these metals reacted with water showed the same slippery and soapy properties as the liquid obtained by mixing plant ash with water, scientists began calling them alkali metals. Now comes alkaline earth metals. Chemists called them the alkaline earths because they were basic, that means they behaved as bases like alkalis but looked powdery, earthy, and were less soluble in nature. Then came 1869. When the periodic table was arranged, suddenly all these names made sense. What started as ancient ashes had become part of the grand order of the elements. So the next time when you hear alkali or alkaline, remember it all began with burning plants and washing clothes. There is another category of elements from atomic number 109 to 118. And as a matter of fact, properties of these elements are still unknown due to some interesting reasons, such as they are short lived. That means they exist only for a fraction of seconds to a few seconds before decaying into other elements. They are artificially made in labs by colliding lighter nuclei. They are extremely rare in terms of only a few atoms of these elements have ever been created. This makes it impossible to collect enough materials for physical experiments. Since they are short lived, direct experiments are difficult. Scientists rely on theoretical models and computer simulations to predict properties like melting point, density, and reactivity. These predictions may or may not be, so we can say their existence is confirmed, but their detailed chemistry is mostly unknown. Now let's dive into lanthanides. Why are they called lanthanides? The name came from the first element in the series, lanthanum, atomic number 57. The Greek word lanthanion means to lie hidden. When these elements were first discovered in the 1800s, they were very hard to separate from one another because they have very similar chemical properties. Chemists felt like these elements were hidden inside minerals. That's why they were called lanthanides, the elements similar to lanthanum or hidden ones. Actually, all the elements in the periodic table has some unique properties in them, and when we speak of lanthanides, all lanthanides are very similar in size and reactivity, and they are difficult to separate in chemical labs because of lanthanide contraction. That is, gradual decrease in atomic size from lanthanum to lutetium. This makes them behave almost alike. They have got their specific position below the periodic table is to keep the table neat and compact. If you place lanthanides in their actual position between barium and hafnium, the table becomes too wide and stretched. To avoid this, chemists pulled them out and placed them below as a separate row. Let's move to metalloids now. The word metalloid comes from Greek metallon, which means metal, and oid means resemblance. So metalloid means metal like. They were called this because their properties are in between metals and non-metals. The term metalloid was first used in the early 1800s. At that time, scientists had trouble classifying certain elements that didn't behave like typical metals but also were not like non-metals. To solve this, they created a middle category of metalloids. Metalloids have a dual nature. They can be shiny and some conduct electricity like metals, but they can also be brittle. And some form acidic compounds like non-metals. If you clearly observe their position in the table, they form a zigzag stair-step line that separates metals and non-metals. Metalloids sit right on that border because they literally have borderline properties. Now let's move to transition metals. Have you ever wondered why some elements in the periodic table are called transition metals? Does it mean some actual transition is happening inside them? Transition metals are those elements sitting right in the middle of the periodic table from group 3 to group number 12. On the left side of transition metals, you see the very reactive alkali and alkaline earth metals. On the right side, you will see non-metals and metalloids. So, these metals form a kind of bridge, or you can say a transition between the two sides of the table. But the word transition isn't just about their position. It refers to how their property changes. As you move across row-wise, the elements slowly change from highly metallic on left to non-metallic on the right. And in between, The transition metals showing a mixture of both worlds. Why are they called transition metals? And the answer is because they mark the transition, both in their position on the periodic table and in their properties, which lie between reactive metals and nonmetals. In short, they are the true middle ground of chemistry. Now let's dive into post-transition metals. Transition metals live in the middle of the periodic table. Now just after them, from group number 13 to we find elements like aluminium, tin, lead and bismuth. Because they come right after the transition metals, scientists named them post-transition metals. But the name isn't just about the position, it's about their unique properties. Transition metals like copper, iron or nickel are very strong and have very high melting points, but post-transition metals are much softer and melt at lower temperatures. For example, iron melts at 1538 degrees Celsius, but tin melts at only 232 degrees Celsius. That's a huge difference. In other words, they are metals but softer, weaker and chemically simpler. That's why we call them post-transition metals, which encounters just after the transition block. Let's study the category of reactive nonmetals. When you look at the periodic table, you will see a group called reactive nonmetals. But wait, why were they given this separate category? Aren't all nonmetals just nonmetals? Reactive nonmetals are found on the right side of the periodic table, mainly in groups 14, 15, 16 and 17. So why create this category? Because these nonmetals are highly reactive compared to other nonmetals like the noble gases. They actively form compounds with metals, other nonmetals, and even with themselves. Their reactivity comes from one key feature, and the feature is that they are just a few electrons away from achieving a stable outer shell. It has very crucial biological importance. Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur are the backbone of life chemistry. DNA, proteins, and even the air we breathe come from this group. So the term reactive separates them from the noble gases, which are stable and inert. Reactive nonmetals, on the other hand, are always eager to form bonds or to form compounds. This eagerness is what shapes much of the chemistry around us, from fire to food, from life to the environment. So next time you think about oxygen in your breath or chlorine in salt, remember they are all part of the reactive nonmetals. Let's take a look at noble gases. Noble gases sit in group 18, the last column of the periodic table. They stand apart because of one defining feature. They are extremely stable. So why did scientists create a separate category? Because unlike reactive nonmetals, which are desperate to gain or share electrons, noble gases already have completely filled outer electron shells. This makes them chemically inert. They don't easily react or form compounds. So why the word noble? Just like noble kings and queens, these gases prefer to stay isolated. They don't mingle or form bonds easily. Their stability and aloofness earned them the title noble gases. So the category of noble gases was created because of their unique stability and non-reactivity. They are silent royals of periodic table, rare, elegant and almost untouchable. Let's take a look at actinides. Actinides have very important and unique properties. They are all radioactive, many are man-made. The actinides are not just dangerous metals sitting in the labs, they have shaped human history, empowering nuclear plants, space missions, and even weapons. At the same time, they remind us of the responsibility that comes with handling such powerful elements. All of us must be aware of thorium, plutonium are used in weapons and nuclear power plants. So the actinides got their own category because they are too unique to mix with the rest of the table. They may sit at the bottom, but their impact reaches the very top of science and technology. That's all for today's video. If you found this video informative, click on like button and subscribe to this channel. Have a good day. Thank you so much.